Hey everyone, it's time for another digital lesson. Today's digital lesson is on volume. So for the last week and a half, you've been doing a lot of lessons about volume of rectangular prisms. Now a rectangular prism is a three-dimensional shape. Now what does it mean to be three-dimensional? One dimension means that you have one form of measurement. So this piece of string is one-dimensional. I can only measure its length from side to side. This piece of paper is two-dimensional. I can measure the length from side to side, and I can also measure the width. When I do this, I'm finding you can either find the perimeter or the area using the length and width. That is a two-dimensional object because it has two parts that I can measure. A three-dimensional object has an extra dimension. It has your length, it has your width, but it also has your height. That's why it's called three dimensions, because it has three different forms of measurement: your length, your width, and your height. So you've been working, last week you were working with the unit cubes, but this week you learned a little bit more about the volume formula. So as you learned, the volume formula is length times width times height. So if you were to measure an object, and you would take its length, and then you multiply it by its width, and then you multiply by its height, you're finding out what your volume is. So, and like what you did last week with the unit cubes, you're finding how many of that little unit you could fit inside of this box. To show you what I'm talking about, I'm going to measure the volume of this macaroni and cheese box. To find the volume, you have to take the measurements of that length, that width, and that height. So to do so, you can use a variety of tools. You can use a measuring tape, which some of your parents might have these in your house. You could also use this kind of measuring tape, which you'll have a lot if you've got some sewing going on in your house. You can also use a ruler. If you don't have any of those tools, a lot of smartphones and tablets now have an app that you can use to measure with. So let's go ahead and get going on measuring the volume of this macaroni and cheese box. When you're measuring your volume, I found that it's easiest to do it with keeping your object flat on the table. That way you're not confused about which side is your length, which is your width, and which is your height. So I'm going to take this measuring tape, and I'm going to first measure my length. And as you can see, when I measure the length of my box of macaroni and cheese, I have 6 inches for my length. So I'm going to go ahead and write down 6 inches for my work. After I measure my length, I'm going to turn my box and I'm going to measure my width. So I take my same measuring tool and I'm going to line it up from edge to edge. And you see that my width is 2 inches. So my length was 6 inches, my width is 2 inches. So now I'm going to go ahead and write down that my width is 2 inches. After I've measured my width, I'm then ready to go ahead and measure my height. So I've already measured the length across, I've measured the width here, and now I'm going to measure the height from top to bottom. Now my height is a little bit tricky. As you can see, it's not right on a whole number. So I look at my measuring tool and I see that this height is exactly 4 1/2 inches. So as I'm using my volume formula, I'm going to have to use what I've learned about decimals and fractions to solve for my volume. So, in that demonstration, we discovered that the volume of this macaroni and cheese box is 54 inches cubed. So, what that means is if I had a cubic inch, which means that it is a cube with an inch for length, an inch for the width, and an inch for the height, I could fit 54 of those cubes inside my macaroni and cheese box. Now let's review how we got there. So we started with the volume formula. The volume formula told us that we need to find our length, our width, and our height. When we multiply those three dimensions together, we will find our volume. So our length was 6 inches, our width was 2 inches, and our height was 4 1/2 or 4 5/10 inches. When I multiplied all of that together using what I learned in math class, I end up with 54 cubic inches. Now you have to make sure that you include this 3 as your exponent because that tells you that you're doing volume. What that means is I have 3 dimensions. I have my length, I have my width, and I have my height. If you do not include those units, we're not going to know that it's cubic units. So make sure that you include that tiny little 3 in your exponent. So your task today, there is an assignment posted in Teams for you where you need to find a rectangular prism similar to my macaroni and cheese box. You have to make sure that every single side is a rectangle, which we learned about in our geometry unit a couple months ago. So you will need to measure the length, the width, and the height to find the volume of your rectangular prism. You're going to post any of your work into the assignments tab on Teams, and all you need to do, if you could show me a picture of you measuring and then tell me what your measurements were, tell me how you solved for it. You could even post a video if you really wanted to, showing how you found the volume. So like I said, you could either use a measuring tape like I did. Your parents might have another kind of measuring tape. You might have a ruler. And if you don't have any of those things, you could get one on an app on a phone or a tablet and be able to measure those volumes. If you have any questions, you know where to reach me.